Hey, hello everybody. This is meeting 3 of 3 for this particular journal club paper. And the funny thing about it is I facilitated the first discussion, and then Sue, who won't be here today, did the second one. So I was actually refreshing my memory for today, since it's been precisely like 2 weeks and 2 days since I last discussed this before. I'd like to start by sort of going around the room here and just getting a sense of where people are, maybe with their semesters, what particular active learning things they're worried about or might be trying to integrate right about now in this current state of affairs. I can tell you where we are here in Virginia. We are in the 6th week of our semester. We're still in person. It's actually worked. We're in a rural location, so that's helped us out. We split our semester into 10 and 4-week components, so we're actually into the second half of our classes already, which is unbelievable since it's still September. And yeah, things seem to be going all right. So I'll just go around to my screen. Kristen is first. It looks beautiful where you are, wherever you are.
Hi, everybody. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm at Emory University, and it is a beautiful day today. And we had awful rain yesterday, so I'm really taking advantage of it today, as well as I have 2 kids who are doing some remote learning inside. So sometimes this is the quietest place for me to be. I am teaching remotely. Emory has a small fraction of students in person on campus. That we only have invited the freshmen back, and that has been a successful choice for us here in Atlanta, which means my senior seminar is completely online. We meet mostly synchronously, and it's a capstone seminar where they are reading primary literature. So we have sort of a modified version of CREATE and are implementing that. We've been doing this for years, and we're implementing it now online for the first time, which has been interesting. So that's kind of my spiel for the moment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lara, you go next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lara Gutzoozi, and I've been a fellow now for 3 or 4 years. I think I was one of the older ones now.
Yeah, you've been around a while.
I've been around a while. I know it's been a while since I've been to one of these.
Yeah.
I'm in Center Valley, Pennsylvania, a little bit outside of Philly. We are in person full time. So with masks and distancing and arrows for going in and arrows for leaving the classroom. Unfortunately, my oldest daughter was supposed to be in college, and she is remote, which makes her very sullen. Because, what greater suffering is there for an 18-year-old girl than having to stay at home while everyone goes to work all day? But I have been it's been a challenge to do the active learning. Actually, one of the emails I've been sending is that I was moved to our conference center to teach my large class. So I have 65 students, but literally in a conference center, and I teach under 4 jumbotrons, and I feel like an unqualified motivational speaker when I'm doing that. And it is really cut into the active learning. In terms of group work, I hesitate to give them too much. I do have them do group work, but they're clearly not as engaged because they're sitting so far away. They're having to say things out loud. They can't whisper it. I literally every day tell a student, please scream out your reasoning, if they happen to be across the convention center for me. So it's been a genuine challenge. For next semester, I requested that I be moved into, my sections be split into 2, and I'd be, still with distancing, of course, but that I'd be moved into a smaller auditorium on campus, just because I feel like it's not as effective in this venue.
Thank you. Ronia. You're muted. There you go.
Thank you. Hi, guys. I'm Rania. I'm from the University of Arkansas, Little Rock, working from home. So unlike you, Lara, we are doing classes on Zoom. So my project is, and with the help of Dr. Mark Bailey here, who's my mentor, I'm trying to get them engaged in the online environment, and it's super hard to do face-to-face and I have classes of like 70 to 90 people, imagine what it's like on Zoom. So that's been my challenge that I've been tackling this semester.
Thank you. Stephanie, you're muted. People, we're 7 months into
Sorry.
this pandemic.
Yes, I know, but I literally just got done with class and yeah, I'm Stephanie. I'm also at University of Arkansas Little Rock in biology. I am teaching my courses online, but synchronously. So I am using iClicker as a live, response system so that I can at least be making them, answer me as we go along. I find them also just difficult to get to work together. I am trying breakout rooms a lot, but I find that it just is not the same. They don't work together to the same extent that they would. And it just takes longer. Like, oh, I just feel like it sucks away time.
Absolutely.
Time.
Yeah,
Time.
and I've heard
It's just what I need more of.
creative uses of breakout rooms is something I've not gotten a lot of practice in, but I've gotten a lot of stories about. So yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Brian, how about you?
Hi, I'm continuing that theme. I'm also in Little Rock, and I'm teaching Organic Chemistry 1 online, teaching on Zoom as well. So my class is completely online. We do it synchronously, and I also try to use iClicker to engage the students as we go. Like Stephanie mentioned, I've tried breakout rooms a little bit, and to not a whole lot of success. With the time issue, and then what are they doing in those breakout rooms? It's at least so far, I'm fairly new to teaching on Zoom, so like I guess everybody is. So I haven't found breakout rooms super helpful, but there's just getting over that challenge of engaging the students on a computer screen. It's easy to hide behind the the turn your camera off, and who knows where they are or what they're doing. So.
Yeah,
I'm having some success, not completely.
We could have a whole hour discussion session on that question, honestly, when you're sitting there teaching the 30 turned off cameras and are you supposed to do something about it? But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole just yet. That's a good question, though. Melanie.
I am Melanie Lenahan. I teach at Raritan Valley Community College in central New Jersey. I'm also synchronous online. We're using Zoom. So same kind of troubles that you're discussing. I decided to do flipped classroom and like a pseudo team-based learning, not to the true team-based learning style, but something like it. So our first class meeting, they have to complete like a readiness assurance quiz before they come to class. I have them do an application exercise in small groups, in breakout rooms. And then the second class meeting is a reteach. So I use Turning Point and clicker questions. And I don't know how effective it is so far. I didn't get a lot of feedback. I haven't kind of polled them yet. So I don't know, but it seems to be something that's structured and working. So I'm going to stick with it and, try to gauge their learning over the course of the semester.
Okay. Dina.
Hi, I'm Dina. I teach at Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York. Right now, I am teaching genetics completely online via Zoom and intro bio lab in person. So I'm doing both. The genetics class, I think I heard somebody just as I was just coming in say the word create. I do a modified create in my class, and in my genetics class. I do a lot of breakout rooms. I do have my students, what I do is I make written activities for them to do every day that I make Google Docs out of. And each group shares a Google Doc and a breakout room during class. And then I move around between the breakout rooms and the Google Docs. Before they get into breakout rooms, I do a mini lecture where I use clickers. And so all of that I think is working fairly well. It's not as good as being in person, but it's as good as I can do. The intro bio lab is just weird because we only have 10 people allowed in a room, and we have 2 rooms next door to each other, and I'm in charge of both sections, and I have a grad TA who's standing in one room while I'm standing in the other, and we're trying to do them. Everybody's wearing masks, and I think we all get way too close to each other all the time, but it's really impossible not to do that in a lab. So do the best we can.
Thank you. Let's go to Greg.
Hi, everyone. Greg Crowther, teaching human anatomy and human physiology at Everett Community College, north of Seattle. So let's see, we're all online. My classes, instructors have been given some choice about whether to be asynchronous or synchronous, and I've chosen live streaming or synchronous sessions. And I mean, I'm going through a lot of the same issues as all of you regarding breakout rooms and so forth. I would say that maybe one slightly interesting thing that's happened is, so usually I just tell the students, you know, here's how the tests are going to be. This quarter, I decided I wanted to actually give them more input into that. So I said, okay, look, we could do computerized exams and they have all these issues, and or we could do oral exams and they have these other issues.
Right.
So what do you think? And my 60-person physiology course basically said, yeah, no, let's just stick with the computerized things. But my 30-person anatomy course said, yeah, we're kind of interested in the oral thing. Let's try for the first exam, let's try part written, part oral, see how it goes, and then reevaluate. So that's what we're doing next week.
Amount of work for you, basically.
Yeah, I mean, but at least it's the 30-person course, not the 60-person course. So I've been interested in oral exams for a long time, thinking that some of my best, most delightful students in class discussions don't seem to always don't perform as well in the written setting. But this was sort of the push I needed to like really do it. So yeah, it is a lot of work, but I'm also excited to see how it goes. So we'll see next week. Next week it's happening.
Nice. Well, good luck.
Thanks.
Now we have Mark.
Hey everyone, I'm also at UA Little Rock with Brian, Stephanie, and Rania. As everyone said, we got to choose, but pretty much everyone is online using Zoom. I use iClickers, breakout rooms, and we have learning assistants that Rania and I have kind of put in place. So those undergraduate peer mentors, and so they actually help. I move them around between breakout rooms every single time. So we know that every room has someone at one point during each class facilitating discussion. And I think that really helps set the tone for what's expected. The challenge I've run into is how do you assess students? And so like some of you have been talking about exams. I tried the online homework platform that we use, running that for an exam, and then having a Google form where they actually have to fill in short responses, that kind of stuff. And I found 2 blatant examples of cheating that had to turn in their work. And so I'm submitting that to the honors council kind of thing. But I just don't have a good way of doing that. And I have 110 students between 2 sections. And so I'd love to do oral or something that shows their comprehension and understanding and application. I just haven't figured out how to do that effectively yet.
To scale, at least, yeah. All right, Jenny, are you there?
Yeah, I am. I'm thinking about students having their cameras off. Mine's off right now because I'm having problems with my internet. And so it might be interesting to know why students are choosing to have their cameras off, because some of them might be, families around, other people.
Oh, yeah.
But it's an interesting choice, because I think it varies for me from day to day. It's like today, it's like, okay, I can't turn it on without it crashing.
Exactly.
But I'm working with Kimberly McClure, who's at Lake Washington Technical College, which is across the lake for me. I'm in Seattle. I'm retired from Edmonds Community College, so I don't have the challenges that you all have with teaching. But I'm excited, Greg, about your trying of oral exams, and interesting to see how that goes, especially having done lots of interviews for research for students, kind of how do you plan follow-up questions? Like, do you plan particular follow-up questions? What does that look like in scaffolding that? Because that becomes more complex than just asking them one question often. But it's great to see everyone. Thanks for facilitating, Michael.
And Jenny, you'll recognize the opening round format here from
yes.
Phil, which is something I have inherited from going to all those meetings, coordinating these journal clubs. Like, yeah, why don't we go around and check in with everybody?
Yes. This is something we do habitually, and it really helps form community when you can.
Yeah, like I was skeptical of, I'm like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. All right, Zach. Are you there, Zach?
I am. Sorry. Hi. My video is off because I'm trying to eat lunch and I didn't want to. But hello. Hi. I'm Zach. I teach at the College of St. Scholastica in Duluth, Minnesota. And we are we have the option to be in person or online. And so I'm hybrid because that's the best we can do in person. So every other day, half my students are in person, the other half are online. And I'm teaching, at least this semester, Gen Chem, which is not part of my Palm project. That's for a sustainability course in the spring, if we ever have a spring. But my pedagogy, such as it was, has taken a significant step back this semester. I'm mostly doing what I call mediocre practice, which is I'm lecturing and they're listening. And
you should coin that phrase. I like that.
Well, I've abandoned best practice almost entirely. It's very challenging in a hybrid setup when some of my students are on technology, some of them aren't, some of them are online, some of them are in person, to do any kind of active learning, particularly when the in-person people are socially distanced. It's been a trick. And if they were all online, it would actually almost be easier, but they don't want to be. They very much like being in the classroom, but they're 10 feet apart from one another, so they have to yell at each other for a group project. So mostly I'm lecturing, and we're digging it, we're moving through content, we're balancing equations, but a lot of that active learning and think, pair, share, I've almost entirely abandoned, and that makes me sad. And I hope we can get back to that at some point. Thank you for listening. I'm going to keep eating, but I'm here.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. And then finally, Alonzo.
Hello, can you all hear me okay?
We can.
Hi, I'm also having lunch. So I'll go back to being no camera, but just to say hi, nice to meet everybody. I am teaching a Principles of Neuroscience, Intro Neuroscience lab course this fall, as well as a Methods of Neuroscience, which is the focus of my Palm project for this fall. Both classes are hybrid with mostly remote. For 3010, the Methods class, it's pretty much gone full remote. I've given the option to students to come in for in-person touch points because it is listed as hybrid, and they have flat out said no. They just prefer to have the sort of active virtual environment. But I did also explain to them the struggles of what that would mean technically coming in and how that would limit the pedagogy. And they seem to get along with it. Even though they would prefer to have in person, they understand it's not the best option at this point. And I've also just got feedback from my mid-semester survey for that course. Kristen will be glad to hear that it's going pretty well. They actually are enjoying a lot of the flip portion. So yeah, I mean, definitely a lot of challenges, a lot more work with trying to deliver content in a new way. But I've heard that this could be a actually boost for things in the future, such as when we want to go away for conferences, then we can't find instructors to substitute for us. If we have good, well-designed video lectures and activities that we can do without being there, then that's something that we can take advantage of in the future. So trying to make the most of the situation and planning for the long term.
All right, thank you very much. So that took a long time, but I like the fact that we sort of all figured out where we're all standing, the challenges we're all facing, and especially with the continued remote situation most of us are in, or at least to some extent, sort of the common challenges that exist. And Alonzo's at Georgia Tech, so we catch that. I'm going to go ahead and share the paper, and what we have here in this article that Sue had originally recommended for us is a consideration of achievement gaps for underrepresented students and how they can be remedied. And so with the title, you got a really basic, okay, active learning does it, fine. This particular group, we don't need to do the gospel of active learning. The questions at hand here would be how they arrived at this result and what you guys think about the efficacy of what they found. And I know a particular thing I took a strong interest in with this paper was the notion of degree of active learning in classes. And so the last time I facilitated discussion of this paper, one of the things I really dealt with was this figure here, figure 4, the idea of intensity of your treatment and the correlation between that and what you would get in terms of achievement. And I really wanted to know, because I ended up comparing it to myself, of course, as I think we all do to some extent. I'm like, oh, are my classes considered low intensity or high intensity or what? And I had to go dig up the results there, and their threshold consideration was spending 0 to 1/3 of your class in something active was considered the passive category, 1/3 to 2/3 being low, and 2/3 on up being high. And so that was their clarification of degree of treatment. So let me just throw that to the room. And before we get to that, we actually had Salaja. Can you hear me? Salaja or Salaja.
Yes. Hi, Michael. Sailaja here.
Would you mind briefly introducing yourself?
Yeah. I'm Sailaja Arungundram. I'm based out of Olympia, Washington. I teach at Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, and my project is regarding teaching general chemistry, teaching what we call the threshold concepts in a way that it sticks, so students can retain it into the Gen Chem sequence, OChem, and beyond. So that's the goal of my farm project.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so, I'm muted, that's embarrassing. Let me just throw this to the group then about particular observations you drew from this paper, things you found most striking that we should maybe focus some of our discussion on.
For my part, Michael, I found most information on the supporting information is really, really useful to me. Basically, the how to, what they define as active learning, and the methods they use for promoting inclusive learning. So those kind of approaches are more useful to me on reading the supporting information.
Oh yeah, so that's not actually here yet. There was a wealth of supporting information on here, and I was just talking about that idea of degree of active learning, which was also something that was more presented supplementally. So the idea here also, what qualifies as active learning, certainly an important consideration. And there's the usual litany of things we could list off: group work, think, pair, share activities, things like that. I think sometimes there's always some ambiguity in the kind of stuff you think you're doing that's active, but maybe isn't as active as you would think or like. Sometimes I end up doing like Socratic lecturing, and I feel like it's really active, but like really it's not. Like I'm talking to them, I got that going for me, but I'm not making them actually do anything, right? Other thoughts about particular highlights of this paper from someone?
Well, I had one. Yeah, so first, let me be clear, as far as I know, this is really good, careful work. I don't have anything negative to say about it, but I asked myself the question of, is this result, is the main result that the achievement gap is decreased by active learning, is that surprising? And the reason I asked myself that is this UW group, back in 2014 did their meta-analysis of active learning. And my takeaway from that was that it was kind of a lift all boats sort of thing, as I understood it, that in general, when you did active learning, average grades got higher because a lot of the low people were sort of boosted up somewhat, which is great, right? I mean, that's what we want. We want everyone to learn a lot. But to me, if you just sort of follow the logic, that means that any group that had a lot of kind of lower grade people in it, when active learning comes in and boosts those people, those groups' means are going to, like rise up closer to the other group's means. So I was trying to figure out if this paper was more surprising than that, or just the consequences of grades overall, kind of rising up and becoming less heterogeneous. And I actually emailed Ellie Theobald late last night, and she hasn't gotten back to me yet, which is fine. But
pretty cool.
That was kind of my wonder about this. Is this a surprising result, or is it just sort of statistics?
Interesting. And from the previous thing you've read from this group, the improvements for people who were on the lower end of the scale were stronger than people who were already doing okay. Like, it's not a matter of everybody proportionately rising. It's actually an equilibration.
That's my understanding. I mean, I didn't really carefully pore over the stats, but it's sort of a ceiling effect, right? If you already have a 95%, there's just not much higher to go. Whereas if you have a 60, I think much more doable to get up to a 70 if you benefit from active learning or whatever. So that's my one and only, big thought.
Well, it's a pretty big thought. And I'd say, like you said, it wouldn't take away from the rigor of what's presented here. But I guess what you're driving at is it sort of an expected hypothesis? Okay.
I think even if it is not unexpected, I think it's nice to kind of put it in that frame of, this is another reason why we should be doing this, is that it specifically is better for underrepresented students. So I agree with you that it's somewhat of an expected result, but based on their old work, but I think it's also really valuable to look at it with this new lens.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but just because it's expected doesn't mean it shouldn't be tested.
Yeah, or verified, maybe.
It's data that's needed, I think, because when you look at the meta-analysis data, there were certainly lots of holes in that. And I think, in addition, the other paper that came out from an overlapping group on the chemistry, the Gen Chem sequence, the Harris et al. That came out in Science Advances, also really supports the idea that what we should be doing is changing the structure of what we do as opposed to improving the students. And I think that whole kind of student deficit model, is there's something wrong with the student, particular groups of students, that this really does point to really the problem lies with STEM in the academy. The problem lies with how we address the cultural building, the way we're teaching, and all those other things. And I think that this is a really important piece of data that is going more in the direction of changing what we do as opposed to the fixing the students.
I thought I would chime in here also and echo that a couple of points. I think one thing that was really nice about this paper was that it identified subgroups that benefited. So minority groups in STEM benefited, which is an extension of what the Freeman paper from 2014 showed. They didn't have it broken out by subgroups. So I thought this was that additional piece of information. And I think this is sort of, we're circling around this idea of structure in the classroom seems to support our underrepresented students more so. And that's come out in this paper and in another, and a number of other publications.
Okay. So if you were to consider some of the ideas that's in here against maybe some of your own classes, your own experiences, do you find that the ideas that are presented in this paper with respect to learning gaps being positively affected, in other words, closed by the application of your particular techniques? Or is there, are there other attributes, are there other things that have to be considered that maybe this paper doesn't get into? And I ask that because this certainly made me like do comparisons to my own classes. And admittedly, because of the nature of the place I teach, I don't have, I'm at a primarily white institution. And so I don't have a lot of minority students, but I certainly, it doesn't mean we don't think about things like achievement gaps, things like that. And this certainly made me think about, was I doing things quote unquote right? If I was using all the techniques I could use to provide equal opportunity, equal representation, things like that. Which is, again, I come back here to figure 4, where I was struck by the notion of how much active learning I was doing. And this sort of funky result they get here, by the way, where the low treatment actually gets worse and then it pops back up for high intensity. I'm going to chalk that up probably to a statistical noise there and not an actual getting worse. But with respect to your own courses, your own experiences, building these sort of cures and other classrooms, how does this resonate with you?
Michael, I was actually going to pitch in and pose that question to everybody, so that's excellent. I constantly compare what I'm reading to what results I am getting from my students as I went from, how to get my DFW rates down. The UALR is a very non-traditional university, so it's not what you're probably teaching at, and it is a non-selective school, just like community colleges. So I love how they use the word active learning is not a silver that you just give and it solves all your problems. Because despite my efforts in transforming my classroom into an active learning space, and I'm trying to study the equity gap in STEM education. That's what my research is focused on in chemical education. So I've been crunching the numbers that I'm getting from my current study, and it doesn't seem to fit in. So I said, why am I not observing such trends at my non-traditional, lots of marginalized groups in our university? And I look at the study, and one factor could be, and I'm going to ask you guys this, is that many of these studies are done at selective universities. So they study marginalized groups at selective universities. Thing is, does that translate? Are all marginalized groups the same is the question. Maybe my marginalized groups in my institution is different. Maybe that's not why I'm not seeing the same beautiful charts here. I'm like, why is my data not looking this pretty? It does not look, it's so messy. And I can't come up with a good conclusion there, So I'll just throw that out to the group there. And I do apologize. I'll let you guys know. I also too, like Mark, have to join the NSF webinar right now. It's specifically for getting grants to close the equity gap. So we're still doing good stuff.
Oh, nice. Well, good luck. It's a very interesting question raised then, though, like the nature of our institutions and the transferability of the data with respect to that.
One thing that occurred to me, and I don't know if others have thought about this, I think that when you have a high intensity active learning classroom, there's probably a lot more opportunities for students to get points doing things other than exams. Whereas a passive classroom is usually mostly just the exam. And so I wonder if the difference between what we see in the exam scores and the percent passing might have to do with the fact that in a highly active learning classroom, there isn't so much weight on the exam. And so when you have, and for many students, I think exams are not a great way to assess their knowledge. They get too much anxiety or whatever. They might be slower with their reading or whatever it is. And so when you have other opportunities for them to show their knowledge, maybe you get a better pass rate. What do other people think of that idea?
So that's the point I was going to raise. The same thing, figure 4, like, does high intensity correlate with how much of their grade was earned through that high intensity? Mm-hmm. And so my intro majors course, we just had our first test last week and we did it on Blackboard, and I hated on Blackboard, and I don't know, it was a shorter exam than I would have given on paper, but it takes them longer. So it's just like I'm having to recalibrate my, testing style and everything. Then I said, they're very nervous because they're majors and they are very nervous. And like Rania said, a lot of them are not prepared for this class. And so I said, go back to the syllabus and look at all the things that go into your grade. This is not your whole grade, right? You are earning your grade all the time. But they don't believe that because they're freshmen and they still feel like it's high school where they're used to getting a 99% on everything. And, it's just like, this is not where you are. So the other comment that I was going to, and I don't know if I'm going to articulate it well enough, but I also wonder if there is a selection bias in instructors who have chosen to use active learning versus instructors who are choosing not to do active learning. And in some ways, I feel like you're saying, like when you're Socratic and it's not necessarily active, but it's still a way of showing that that students are capable of coming along with you, right? Mm-hmm. in this topic, whereas someone who's just a lecturer is really like, I am the fount of knowledge that you have to drink from my fountain, right? And so that's like not maybe a measurable thing, but I do think that there is something to be said for, adopters of active learning at whatever intensity level are making a statement to their students, or a sort of subconscious statement to their students about, how we view you.
I think that's a really interesting idea, Stephanie. And something's jumping in my brain, and I won't be able to put my finger on it. But I feel like there's a group at UNC who recently had a paper about sort of structure in intro bio classrooms, and I feel like they compared against themselves. Like they offered a traditional classroom, and then they offered something that they called like high structure. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I feel like they saw gains in their high structure even when they were comparing against themselves. So I think that's probably the only way to get at your question, right? Like experimentally.
Right.
Because you're right.
But it's like a terrible control, right?
It is. Yes, you're right. But like, is there a good way to even address the question that you raise? Like, mm-hmm. How are we just the adopters of active learning, just self-selecting faculty for this? I don't know. That's a good question.
Now, Alonzo offers another way to look at it on the chat. If you can read that, I'll read it out. Many classes that have high average grades but are pure lecture. Is there anything fundamentally different about those classes, and could those courses still benefit from active learning? That's an interesting question, and it actually does raise the issue of somehow of trying to make some of these assessments based on grading, right? I actually really appreciated the comments you guys are making about magnitude of individual assignments, not having the 40% of your grade midterm or something like that, but actually having many smaller low stakes things as opposed to individual high stakes things. And so I don't really have a slam dunk alternative for the authors here, but it does sort of suggest that there can be some issues with using grades or using the GPAs people get as a means of measuring this kind of stuff. Sort of in our group here, of course, we would always argue for a benefit to active learning, but clearly you can get, and we have tons of examples of our own students, of people who can get really good grades with just, hearing the lecture and spitting it back on the exam. I suppose the question would be, can you come back a year later or come back to a more advanced course and see if they've retained the knowledge, and see maybe if active learning does a better job of sort of really instilling these fundamental ideas into one's head. That's sort of my convoluted answer to that, because I think that is a really interesting point.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, I think most faculty are those people, right, who were able to learn from lecture and retain the information. And so there's lots of examples probably on this Zoom call right now who did that.
Many of us in the Type A community that
especially the older ones of us like me, that there was no active learning. But yeah, I do. But I also was thinking the same thing that Greg just wrote in the chat, which is that I think a lot of courses that I know where the professors just lecture, they're only asking them for spit back information on the exam. They're not giving them really conceptual exams. And so, yeah, everybody gets an A, but what does that A really mean? Mm-hmm. And I think in biology in particular, that's a problem for us because we don't have like standardized exams that we all like. In some of the other fields, there's like a national test that everybody takes or whatever, but we don't do that. So we're all just making up our own exams and setting the bar wherever we want to set it. Mm-hmm.
I'm many times jealous of the system they have in chemistry, where everything is, it's frustrating sometimes, but it's more often than not, I'm like, wow, that's really cool that you have this like national, like everyone just agrees to this. And you finish your PhD in 5 years, by the way, and that's lovely. That you have that. If only we had an American Biology Association, and that would take care of a lot of the stuff for us. But yeah, alas, we don't have that.
I mean, we can't even agree on what you should be teaching in biology.
Yeah, exactly.
What we should be testing.
Yeah, there is actually a national human anatomy and physiology exam. And as far as I can tell, it's awful. It's god awful. So I'm never going to give my students that, even though it's, an official product of our National Human Anatomy and Physiology Society. Mm-hmm. So.
And for a time, we've been using the field exam that the College Board puts out for our just accreditation assessment purposes. That's okay. I mean, the thing is, regardless of what you do, there's going to be stuff on there that you didn't emphasize or you didn't cover. We haven't done a lot of plant stuff in our curriculum as of late, and as it turns out, the field exam's got a ton of plant stuff on it, just coincidentally, and so of course our students were bombing that section of it. So I don't know if there's a good catch-all example there of something. I suppose there's, territory to be mined in there in terms of something to do for the community. Like, I know there are concept inventories out there, and maybe bringing those more to the forefront is the answer, as opposed to reinventing the wheel on what techniques are or what tools are available. And Stephanie mentions ASB&B.
Yeah, so biochemistry and molecular biology, I help with the grading of those every spring. And actually, It's one of my favorite things to do because I feel like, my students aren't the only ones who didn't learn this.
Yeah, I do that.
It's very affirming.
In like one question, that whole thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting meeting because you spend an hour and you get down into like such minutia. Should this say shall or should this say will? It's like, oh my God. And I know you have to normalize it. I get it, but I'm just like, you just want to say I don't care and hang up. It like, of course you can't do that. All right. So these are some really interesting ideas, and I think a lot of it speaks to there not being like one sort of catch-all way to study this. I mean, this is clearly a good faith effort to use the resources and options available to do a study like this. You could quibble over the mechanisms, the instruments that are used, you know, but when asked to provide an alternative, right, it's hard to come up with something to suggest. I think the suggestion made sort of towards the beginning of the conversation here about different underrepresented groups, not necessarily, well, definitely not being a monolith, and definitely maybe having different issues or different situations to resolve. That's probably another question about maybe subdividing the data, considering other particular groups. I imagine if you do that, you don't have enough people. Yeah, I'm speculating as I go here that there would be a statistical power reason to consolidate everything into an underrepresented group pile, but that would be another, I suppose, consideration. Can you subdivide this into different groups and see, do the results remain the same? And then the suggestion we had before, institutional type. Do you see the same results as well?
So the problem with that is they just didn't have a lot of studies to work with.
Yeah.
Right? There was a pretty small data set to begin with.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the data couldn't be collected prospectively rather than retrospectively.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I have my students read papers, probably not like this, like, because usually it's going to be a more straight up like wet lab type paper they'll read. Like I always want them to come up with like, okay, what's the next experiment? Like what would you do next? And they always want to say like, oh, we just increased the sample size. I'm like, okay, that's nice. Yes. You could always have, you're not wrong, but I'd like you to think a little more creatively. I have another class where we talk a lot about model systems, and so they'll always answer that question. Well, I'd like to do the whole thing in mice. Okay, great. Yeah, that's, again, great idea, but I'd like you to go a little further than that and think about how you could do the experiment further.
Can I, if you don't mind, I thought I would move I have just a comment about something that they said in the discussion. And they propose that there's 2 key elements that are required to design and implement STEM courses. And that is deliberate practice and a culture of inclusion.
Right here.
And I don't disagree with that, but I was wondering if people thought that the data that they present here, can they come to say how, like, do they draw on that from the data that they've presented, or is that just something that they're pulling together? Because the culture of inclusion, I don't know, is measured in these data at all.
Yeah, I'm just reading their deliberate practice section here. So I think that would be easier. Yeah, equally important. Inclusive teaching emphasizes treating students with dignity and respect, communicating confidence to meet high standards, demonstrating a genuine interest in their personal growth and success. Oh, the head and hearts hypothesis.
Yeah, the head and heart. And so I wonder if there are people who, so for example, they might adopt active learning techniques, but their heart's not really in it, and they don't really believe that the students can, achieve great things or something along those lines. And those are I wonder if you could have an active learning classroom where it's actually really not supportive at all. It's not very inclusive, and you might not see the benefits. I don't know. I just thought this paragraph was particularly interesting in thinking about how I want to go forward from these data.
Yeah. In a different conversation, not related to this paper, we had been talking about if you want things like this to work, you have to be forthright with your students and make sure your students understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. So to try to meet your scenario there, I could see okay, flip the classroom, and you give no explanation of what you're doing, and you just simply say, you know what, I'm just going to do this. What's the impression your students get with a flipped classroom? Oh, you're not really teaching. You're just making me do all this stuff. So I think one way to arrive at the result you're talking about would be simply just to do it and not tell anyone why you're doing it. And it would just be like, okay, what is this? and that would be your heart's really not into it. Maybe your dean said you had to do it. It's like, okay, we're going to do this now. I'm doing your devil's advocating basically the question there, but it seems like that would work.
I wonder if that's the pushback in some respects why, like, you know, sometimes this data seems extremely obvious to me. Like, why isn't everybody adopting this? And there's a number of answers to that, but it sounds like if you don't really have your heart there, you could either do it so poorly that it, like, lecturing would be better in some respects. Anyways,
or is it just inertia? Like that.
Oh, well, yeah, I think there's that too.
Yeah, that like once you've done something for X number of years, it's clearly the right, and your student evals are decent, like clearly you're doing it the right way. And so why would I change it? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, I don't, you know, I've reached a point, I've been doing this 12 years now, and it's like, okay, I seem to have figured out how to do these things. And I'm not saying I'd resist change, but I'd probably now more than before would be like, okay, but I think I know I'm doing it right. I would like to think I'm receptive to, you know, data and evidence-based practices or things like that. But as I get older, I can appreciate inertia more than when I first started. So I think that would be a barrier to be overcome as well. And I look at the things highlighted here, teaching students with dignity and respect, communicating confidence, demonstrating genuine interest. Those are going to be difficult to quantify. They're difficult as metrics. So to answer your original question of does this paper actually suggest and promote a culture, what does it say specifically? Culture of inclusion. Maybe they are, and it's just really hard to tell. I mean, yeah, that's a great question.
Kristen, I had a fairly similar impression that this head and hearts hypothesis was mostly just them hand waving, but I did find it interesting in the supplementary information, they had this little section about supplementary instruction, I think it's called, which is sort of a different model where just struggling students can get extra help from TAs or whatever. And they were pointing out in their review of that data, that didn't seem as convincing, not as good at decreasing the achievement gap. And they had some ideas there about maybe that supplementary instruction isn't conveying that message as effectively of like, we believe that all students can succeed. And you can imagine if certain students have to like slink off to the office for extra help at office hours, that might, you know, not feel as welcoming as like, no, we're all doing active learning because I want you all to learn. Yeah. So I felt like that gave a little bit of a basis for that hypothesis. So it didn't feel like pure hand waving to me.
So that was in the supplementary information? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good suggestion to look at.
This paper has a ton of supplementary information.
Yeah.
I wonder if that was originally not supplementary, and when they wrote the discussion, that was sort of in the main paper, and then they had to take it out, and so it sounds like weird the way it is now. But
what journal were? Oh, Psychological and Cognitive Sciences. Yeah, I can't say I'm familiar with their publication practices. Yeah, that's an intriguing idea. Anybody else?
well, yeah, I mean, it is a PNAS article. But yeah.
Oh, that's a section, not an.
Yeah.
Oh, PNAS. Okay, I am more familiar with PNAS. So yeah, I could see them having to relegate some of the stuff then maybe to supplemental. Thank you for catching that.
Unmute. I guess I would ask this group one more question, sort of relatedly. Do you think this data or this paper is compelling enough that could convince colleagues to try active learning? Like, what do you guys think? Is this a silver bullet for convincing your neighbor in your office suite or whatever?
I take that a step further, Kristen, because we've been having these discussions in terms of how to bring information like this to faculty who are not teaching focused primarily, but do teach, in order to help close some of these achievement gaps, if this information is to believe, and that's one way to help reduce the equality gaps. And so one thought was that we could have people like Freeman here come and talk about these sorts of papers and these sorts of experiments, but is this going to be convincing to a group of people doing electron microscopy?
Yeah, and you're at a large scale issue there of if you have people and I'm not saying this is exclusively an R1 problem, but yeah, I think it would probably be accentuated R1s where you would have more people that are probably not in it for the teaching. And if the teaching is something that is done on the side or done begrudgingly, I could definitely see this being a harder slog. I didn't finish, actually. It occurred to me I didn't finish my thought about inertia from before, and that is some of these changes are things that may end up being generational, and that people that are coming up into the teaching ranks now are, not all, but certainly much more than they were before, being trained with these considerations in mind, where they certainly weren't when I was going through training, which wasn't all that long ago. So I could see there being sort of a slow roll to progress here as, frankly, people retire and other people come in. Not that we should have to wait for that, but that's ultimately what would push a lot of this stuff forward. Yeah, and I'm just reading Dina's comment there, which I think is a valid one. Changing behavior is based on emotion, not logic, right? The idea that if we present a bunch of data, Dina, the argument there, the data would be less effective than maybe an appeal of some sort, case anecdote, something like that.
This is what I was going to say. Like, is it more effective to have stories from students, for example, where they really can articulate how they've benefited, in combination perhaps with some of the more quantitative data could maybe change some hearts and minds of our colleagues, perhaps?
Totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's intriguing.
It's interesting because even as scientists, people do not, they can look at the data and it doesn't change their behavior unless they feel an emotional reason to change their behavior.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, you can read, not that this is the exact same thing by a long shot, but all the things you read now of presenting people with data, and it simply makes them harden their position in the other direction. Maybe there's some comparison, not a lot, but like that same notion that like in some cases change is made by emotion as opposed to data. I think that's a great point, Dina. Yeah.
I've also noticed personally, I run a inclusive excellence program at RIT, and one of the things that we've done is, you know, run workshops for people about inclusive mentoring and stuff like that. And one of the lessons we learned really early on was do not give them primary data, primary literature. Give them secondary sources, because when you give faculty primary literature, they go into this pick it apart, look for the flaws mode, okay? And you want them to see the big picture, not to focus on all the little, you know, well, they could have done this and they could have done that. That's not the point of it.
We were trying to set up some assessment strategies for our department, and we had someone finally, after 20 minutes, she finally sort of understood that we weren't trying to create some like scientific study. It was like, well, what's the control here? Where some like, this is just for accreditation, like that we just collect the survey data. Sort of the same idea that like we're hardwired to overthink these problems, right? Okay, it is the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and sort of draw us to a close, and I see people have had to go off to other meetings here along the way. This was really good. I appreciate everyone coming. We have not had this many people come to one of these in a long time, and so I appreciate the volume of people and all the different perspectives that you guys had to share. In a couple weeks, we'll have the next paper up. Those of you who have been with us for a couple years, rather than try to cram all these sessions into 1 week. We've been staggering them. And so we'll have, over like the last 3 weeks of October, once again, 3 separate opportunities to come and talk about our next paper. So good luck out there, everyone. Stay safe. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye all.